Hi, I'm Mary Aguirre, and today I'm going to be talking about body dysmorphia in men. This is kind of an issue I chose first of all because it's kind of like a cause and effect type of thing. It's based on society being the effect. Body standards, and like unhealthy diet circulating in the world, and how like you're supposed to look a certain way. And I feel like it's only ever really talked about in females, but it's also something in men. So I decided to talk about it. So I want to start off by kind of explaining what body dysmorphia is, what it's defined as. So I think the best definition that I would personally say is that body dysmorphia is basically being unhappy with the way you look and trying to fit into something that society has placed upon you, that you're supposed to look one way and that way is the right way. The Mayo Clinic defines body dysmorphia as a disorder that is a mental health condition in which you cannot stop thinking about one or more perceived defect or flaw in your appearance, a flaw that appears minor or can't be seen by others, but you can feel so embarrassed, ashamed, and anxious that you may avoid any social situations. And I feel like this is something that, again, you see a lot in women, but you don't really see in men, because men have this like idea that they're supposed to be perfect, strong, and brave, and confident. They're not supposed to care about what anybody else thinks. So I kind of want to explore like the emotional, the social, and psychological impacts of body image disorder on men. So the problem is what we're going to start off with. So the National Library of Medicine has kind of found that 43% of males are dissatisfied with the way they look. And because of this, 7% of teen boys in high school, 6 to 7%, tend to abuse like steroids, and it's really unhealthy because it has like long-term effects, and it's overall really bad because their body is still developing, they're really young, and they're going into the steroids because they have the idea that if you don't have muscles, you're not really strong, then you're not fit, you're not right, you're not going to be liked by women, you're not going to be fit into society, you're not a real man. 7 to 15% actually go into cosmetic surgery, not necessarily teens, but overall, which is kind of crazy because you think it's not so much, but then you actually find out that it's so much because slowly it's just increasing and increasing that men have these needs to be perfect, so they get surgeries to fit into society just because they feel unhappy with their body. 12% go into a dermatology setting, which is basically that if you see like a pimple, you see acne, you start getting into skincare and all of these things because you feel like you don't look perfect. You look in the mirror and you think, oh my god, what is wrong with me? Um, Physical appearance matters way more than just to females and just to anybody in general. It's been an ongoing crisis since literally forever. The Victorian era, you had to wear these tight corsets where you had to look this way and had a small waist for women. For men, you had to act a certain way. They had to wear tights and things like that. You just had to be perfect in order to be a real man, to fit into society. And I think that's the real problem, is that society, social media, it has this perceptive that a man has to be muscular, has to have good skin, has to act this way, act that way, when in reality, it's so much more. So this is some personal investigation I did. There is many more examples about this, but I thought this was kind of the more important parts. In this first picture, you can see that it's a guy posing, he's muscular, he's good looking, he kind of fits in society's needs, but then you see that he's also very insecure. He did all this because he's insecure, and it's insecurities that men on men give themselves, not just women in society. It's the need to want to be perfect, to look a certain way. And the second, we have like a guy, he's depicting what he feels like and everything. And the third image, I think, is what you have to focus very deeply on. His name is David Goggins, and he's a man who was pretty obese, and he lost weight really fast, and he has like this really like toxic mentality on how to lose weight, and many young teenage boys kind of fall into that, as well as Andrew Tate. But this is more David Goggins. I felt fit more in because he kind of, he's somebody who like shows you workouts and things like that. But his motivation, though people say it helps, I found that it's really way more toxic than you might think. It's bad. It's genuinely bad. He kind of, like a drill sergeant, he'll yell at you. He'll tell you that you're fat. You have to get up and work. You have to do something 3 hours a day. If you're not working out, then you're not right. You're not a man. It's just really toxic environment. And the third one, we say, again, kind of like what I said about David Goggins. He's talking about how you're finished at the gym working out, but then you look in the mirror and in your head you're like, I don't look right, I'm still really fat, or I'm too skinny, I don't look good, I'm not good, so I'm gonna work out more, which leads to a lot of health conditions like anorexia and like starving yourself, unhealthy diets, which isn't good. Okay, this is some personal stories I found. It's an article called I Repulse Myself by the Western Daily Press. These are some personal stories, people talking about how they don't view themselves the right way. In one of these stories, we meet one male, his name is Gareth, and he basically calls himself freakishly ugly, and he kind of talks about how um, he just doesn't feel right in his body, he feels ugly, he works out, but he's doesn't the right way, and how, like, beauty culture, standards, they create this problem and this mentality in men that they're supposed to look one way, and it builds a toxic environment around that. And it's not just only seen in women. I know, again, I'm speaking at it. You see it mostly in women, but then you realize that men also have this. That's why so many men kind of like work out and everything, and then it ends up translating into more things. It's an emotional thing that leads to isolation and suicidal intentions. People are very high risk of suicide, 30 times higher than general population, which is crazy because you don't think about it, right? You don't really think that it's such a bad thing, that maybe it's just like internal, just it's bad for your health, but it causes a really big mental strain on males. They're expected to a certain degree to fit into this masculinity thing, which kind of goes into like gender roles. They're supposed to be physically strong, they're supposed to be brave, they're supposed to be courageous, they're supposed to act one way. If you don't have muscles and you're tall, a certain height, you're not a real man. You're not worthy enough to be loved. And it's just a crazy thing. It's built on expectation, society, and psychological factors. Okay, this is kind of going into like the three things that I found while doing my research. So I want to talk about the first one, which is muscle dysmorphia. So this is kind of like when you can see a guy in the gym, he's really muscular, like the previous images I showed. He's really muscular and he has all these muscles, but he still sees himself as lanky or like really skinny, and that he still needs to keep working out, which makes him want to inject steroids or do some type of drugs that will enhance the way he looks. They excessively work out and they go on these extreme diets, and you don't really bat an eye at it because, oh, it's a gym bro. They're working out, it's normal, but it's not. It's really toxic, and it's affecting their mental health and their physical of a lot. They overtrain, they use steroids, they're taking restrictive diets to build muscle. And society has like these ideals and gender roles. Some people, like women are supposed to be skinny and slim, and guys are supposed to have muscles and be tall and fit, but it's not right. The healthy body isn't necessarily muscular. A healthy body is somebody who eats a well balanced diet and works out leisurely, not somebody who's like extreme working out. Some people who have like insane muscles. It's just toxic. It's crazy. Which leads into my second point, which is emotional armor. Bodybuilding culture and media portrays the ideal body as a muscular giant physique. You could think something kind of like a superhero or something. They construct this ideal of what a man is supposed to be, and it builds these insecurities, especially in young boys, because they're exposed to media so early on about a guy having to look this one way to be liked and to be fit in, but that's not right. Okay, this is and which leads on to my third point, which is that media has played a significant role in causing this kind of like epidemic of things. Media portrays superheroes as having a perfect body. In anime shows, you see these tall, slim, fit guys, nice hair, nice skin. They get the girl, they get the fame, the power. They're perfect because they fit into the ideal of what a man is supposed to be, and most of the time, that man has a strong build, a physique, nice body, and kids or teens are exposed to that so early on into their age, that's what they know as the ideal to be. It's what they know to be true. It's their knowing, it's what they grew up knowing. It's kind of like what their sociological growing up, it's their socialization, it's what they know to be true, what they're exposed to at an early age, and what they adapt to, what they know. You can't really change that because it's all they've ever known. So I want to go kind of into the extreme diet portion of it. So one of my articles, it was kind of called like anorexia in reverse, and it's kind of like about talking about how men will go into like these extreme diets, and I mean extreme diets. They'll eat like 500 calories to like 800 calories a day, and they'll work out for like 3 hours in excess just to like build muscle and to fit in, and that's genuinely insane, right? They'll use steroids, and again, bodybuilding culture, it puts like this idea into kids' mind, teens, and it keeps developing on, and they feel like they have to alter and enhance their body just to fit in. It's a rising issue, body image dissatisfaction. Um, it includes like anxiety, depression, and poor self-esteem in guys, which ends up kind of, it ruins not only their mental health, but it makes them act out in the real world. You see kind of like teen boys talking about how, oh, a woman belong in the kitchen, a woman said this place is that, and a man's role is to provide and do this and that. And it's tied into this whole thing about dieting and bodybuilding and body dysmorphia, because it's these ideals, they're all connected, and they all go into teens' minds that this is the way things are. Like David Goggins and Andrew Tate. And it's the idealized concept that a male body is powerful, muscular, and lean. It is, and it grows into like insecurities among men, and then they cannot picture themselves as perfect, so they have to keep on doing things to make themselves perfect. They'll take performance enhancing drugs to achieve the perfect body. They promote terrible dieting to younger audience. If you're older, influencers who will go to the gym for perfect toned bodies. It's insane, the diets and everything that they have to go through just to be perfect, when it's toxic. It's bad. It's really bad. You think that when you see like Ed Twitter and things like that, it's also a thing for men. It's not just a woman thing, and people don't really think about it, because to them, again, in gender roles, society, and everything, it's, oh, men aren't have that. Men aren't meant to have emotions. Men aren't to feel this way, but they do, and it all comes kind of coming back into full circle, and it leads to this. Again, this kind of ties into the emotional and social themes. We have emotional distress and isolation. Men have this habit, and they feel trapped in their own body because they cannot meet social needs. You have a fast metabolism and you're skinny, you're okay. You're skinny, you're not fat or anything, but you're also not muscular. You're not a real man. You don't fit in. And it like kind of creates a battle internally for men. And it's like, society tells you this thing, and you tell the other thing, and maybe even your family will tell you eat too much or you eat too little, and it just kind of ruins your mind because you don't know what you're supposed to think, what you're supposed to do. And men feel like they can't go, get a therapist and things like that, because that's not what a man does, and it's crazy. Then there's a stigma in masculinity that, again, emotional vulnerability is normally perceived as a flaw, in particular in society, particularly in men, that they cannot express themselves, when that is simply not true. It's perfectly normal for a man to have emotions, to feel these things, but they don't, and it's just scary, because you have the right to feel your emotions. You have the right to feel a little insecure. You have the right to look the way you want to look. You don't have to care what other people think, but yet it's still a thing. They're just encouraged from their image of what they look like. If they had a little bit of acne, bad skin, if their haircut is too ugly, too big, too bold, everything is criticized. And if you're too skinny, not enough muscle, it's crazy, because it all ties in together. And then you end up building this toxic environment, and you end up expressing it because you just don't know if you can have help, because it's not what a man does. And it kind of all bottles up, and then one day it just explodes, and you don't know what to do. It's like it's a health concern, because it's being seen more and more often now, and especially in teen boys. I'm gonna go into kind of like sociological theory connections. So I kind of want to start off with the symbolic interconnectionism. So I want to explain this really well, because I don't want to sound biased or anything, or sound like I'm on any side, because I'm not. I'm just expressing my opinion and what I found. And the first part, again, in the symbolicism, it's kind of like, for a guy, for a man, for a teen boy, you grow up and you see superheroes, you see strong men everywhere, and that kind of idealizes that the ideal physique and the ideal men physique is like muscles, masculinity, it's power, and it's authority. And I think that's what kind of gets men a lot, is that because you're muscular, you have authority, you know? It's constant reinforcement also, because you see men on social media, they'll pose up and they'll show you their muscles, and then everybody's hyping them up, and no matter the gender, no matter anything, they're like, wow, how did you get that? You look so amazing, your body's incredible, teach me your ways. And it's the ideal body, and then everybody follows into it, you know? If you look really strong, you look really muscular, you look like Superman, you are that guy, you are that man. And it's kind of like a pattern. It flows into the social constructs of reality. You know, the lean body was once ideal. You know, it wasn't too fit, wasn't too nothing. But society changes. You know, globalization and things like that. You see that in culture, kind of like in K-pop, their bodies weren't insanely fit, but they had a lean, nice body. And that was the thing a few years ago, honestly, like around 2018, that was a thing. You know, the lean body was the look. Too much muscle was ill, but now it's like a lot of muscle. It's in, you know, kind of look like Hercules, like a muscle, like a Greek god. That's the build. That's the thing. That's the way. And it's because society, it changes, and as it changes, everybody has to adapt to a certain way you look, the ideal body, you know, and then it's instigated again by other men and society, because you constantly see it changing in time. You see the praise and the admiration everybody gets, and you're like, I want that, you know. You want it, you envy it, and you're greedy for it, so you force your body to adapt, and you go on these extreme diets and insane workouts for it. And your emotions, they distress, you don't know what's happening, and it still happens, you know. And then again, gender norms and social norms, they play a significant role. Like, men are dissatisfied, and again, if you're not a man who's strong, who provides, who's masculine, you don't have authority, then you're not a real man, and it's a toxic environment that just keeps happening, and it will keep happening, because that's just how society is changing over and over, you know. There's social expectations that men should be physically assertive and unemotionally hide their emotional emotions, because that's just a thing. It's been a thing for years, and for some reason, it's still a thing, and nobody talks about it. But we really should, because the more you ignore somebody's pain, the bigger the problem grows. You know, I could speak about it, but who's actually going to try to do something about it? Which goes kind of into like conflict there, you know. For certain people, especially in the working classes, you know, like lower class, you see that they need to achieve the perfect body because they don't have money. They can't get away with it. They don't have fame. They can't get away with being a little chubby or having not so a fit body, because they don't have it. They know they have to work double the thing, because they cannot look good. They don't have this certain way they look, and it's insane. Compared to a high standing man, you know, if you have at least some money, then you have something going for you. And you don't have to have the perfect body, but if you're lower middle class and things like that, you're really working up, you have to be strong. And I wish I could say that it's not necessarily affecting people who are in higher class, but it still technically is, because you see that they'll pay insane things for working out, and you have to be strong, because if you even if you have money, you may not be perfect. You know, you have money, but who's gonna look at you if you don't have a good physique? If you're not a man who has a, you know, authority, power, but who has a masculine strong to them, who kind of has that muscular body, you're just not right. And the beauty industry has taken great pride in this. I don't want to say pride, but they've taken a certification in basically exploiting the insecurity of young men into this. You know, and it's insane. You'll see commercials talking about how obesity is rising. You need to go at the gym and like take these drugs, use this, come to this gym, and things like that, so that you can look better. There's diet pills, gym memberships, fitness supplements, influencers talking about what workouts were best, and diets. And it's crazy, because the beauty industry, social media, they tie in together to be the biggest problem that shows all of these young men, these teenagers, and everybody that it's happening. It's a thing, and you don't know what to do. But it all comes down, you know, it's the biggest issue that we have. I feel like I've been talking for a long time, but I promise we're almost over. So this is kind of like the last thing I want to talk about. It's basically the growing concern in public health. You know, the growing issue with using steroids, extreme diets, and going to the gym so much, and it's an issue. You know, it's an issue. It's a public issue. It's an epidemic, because it's just growing and growing and growing, and it's happening, and nobody's really talking about it, but it's happening, and you need to talk about it. You know, it causes organ damage, and the abuse of steroids, especially, it affects their body physically, and they potentially could die, be hospitalized, because they're not eating well, they're not feeding their body well, and they're just it's insane, because it's like it's basically anorexia all over again. but in reverse, some people even bulking, it's eating in excess just to get that perfect body. It's crazy, and then men's mental health. Nobody really wants to take it seriously, and it's a shame to say, but it's true because men feel like they can't. They might cry for help, showing you this. They talk about it, but you people were like, oh, but you look so good. Keep up the good work, and then it invalidates their feelings. um, it's a call for action, especially in public health. It needs to be addressed. It's an emerging issue, and it's rising and it's rising, and we see it more and more as each generation goes. Because you have this ideal to be the perfect body. Do you have the perfect body? I want to leave you with kind of these last questions to kind of ask yourself before you post something, or when you see a man in social media, with muscles and everything, and just think about honestly, your life. Yeah, your life, how everything is going, and that not everybody has to look perfect, to look a certain way, to be healthy. How can media and advertising be used as a force of positivity change and redefining masculinity? People can post about how they're healthy. How they don't have to. You don't have to be extremely muscular to be good looking or anything like that. That's not true. It's not true at all. And then, what steps can society take to reduce the stigma around men's body image, dissatisfaction, and mental health struggles? First of all, again, we could stop encouraging all these unhealthy things and talk about how it's not good for you. Why do you keep doing it? People post about it all the time, but they don't talk about the backbones of it, like, the backlash and the cons of it. You need to talk about everything. You just can't show one thing and not show the whole story. Which, again, in what ways can the public health campaign address muscle dysmorphia and body image issue in men? You could talk more about it. I feel like it's only ever seen in women, and they only really advertise it. Talk about how men's feelings are also valid. I'm not invalidating women's feelings, but I'm talking about how people just assume that a man can't have feelings when it's not true. They can have feelings, and I feel like schools, social media, as need to talk about more about how it's okay to just it's okay to gain 1 pound. The world didn't end. And I feel like people just need to talk more about it. Stop feeding into toxic beauty standards. I'm including my presentation kind of what everything I thought. So body dysmorphia, it is a sociological problem, and it's affected mostly by social media and the masculinity and the culture behind having a perfect body and being what is defined as a real man. It's the growing pressure on men to achieve the ideals of a muscular body. And again, it's driven by the beauty industry, social media, and it has serious implications on their mental and emotional health. And it should be something that we talk about more and more. It's not just seen in women, it's a growing issue that we need to talk about.